Hello there, I'm Paul Belflem and this is Industrial Organization. This presentation is about going beyond simple Kono mergers. Our objective is twofold. We want first to analyze the profitability of mergers between firms in a Bertrand industry, and we also want to understand the potential coordinated effects of mergers. This presentation is based on sections 15.3.3 and 15.3.4 of the textbook. Let us start with mergers under price competition. So far, we've been talking about mergers in Kono industry. And remember, there was a conflict between two forces when it comes to judge whether a merger can be profitable or not. The first force, which is increasing profits of the merger, is the fact that firms reduced competition among them. Okay. The second force, which in the Kono industry was working in the opposing direction, was that the outside firms, facing a reduction of quantity by the merged firms, these outside firms react by increasing their quantities, which is detrimental to the profit of the merged firms. Now, let us redo this analysis in a price competition context. Well, it's still the case that when merged firms decide together, they want to reduce the competition among them. They want to internalize their previous rivalry. How do they do so when they choose prices? Well, naturally, they will set higher prices than the prices they were setting when they were separate. Okay, so they benefit from the fact that they no longer compete with one another, and naturally, this drives them to increase prices. Now, what is the reaction of the outside firms, the firms which are not in the merger? Well, in a price competition context, remember that prices are strategic complements. The reaction functions have an upward slope, meaning that when one firm increases its price, the other firms react by increasing their price as well. And this is exactly what happens here. Because the merged firms increase their price, the outside firms react by increasing their prices as well, and this is good news now for the merged entity. The reaction of the outside firms is increasing their profits rather than decreasing it, as it was the case in the Kono industry. Okay, so now there are clearly stronger incentives to merge because the reaction of the outside firms is increasing the profitability of the merger. Okay. Now, this is also very bad news for the consumers. Not only are mergers more likely to happen, and so there will be a reduction of competition in industry, but this reduction of competition is even worsened by the fact that the outsiders also increase their prices. Okay, so unless there would be a strong reduction in costs because of the merger, we can expect more mergers to happen in price competition context, and these mergers to be detrimental to consumers. Okay, so this is what we record here. If firms have differentiated products and compete in prices, a merger between two firms leads to higher prices for all firms. Okay, so there are much higher private incentives to merge in a Bertrand industry than in a Kono industry. And if there are no efficiency gains, we are totally sure that the merger is welfare reducing and so should be prevented by the competition authorities. Okay, so this is the main difference between horizontal mergers in under price competition compared to under quantity competition. Okay, now let us move to another extension of what we analyzed beforehand. So far, we have implicitly assumed that competition takes place before and after the merger. Okay, but we should ask ourselves whether the merger is not making collusion or tacit collusion easier between the firms. Okay, so we need to take into account what are called coordinated effects, which is to say that the merger would induce a change of competition or the way firms compete on the market, and especially by making tacit collusion among firms after the merger easier to sustain than before the merger. Okay, so we need to ask ourselves what are the likely effects of a merger on this sustainability of collusion? Well, on the one hand, a merger implies a reduction in the number of firms. Okay, there are fewer firms on the market after the merger, and if you remember our analysis of tacit collusion, we have shown that tacit collusion is easier to sustain the fewer firms there are in the industry. Okay, so it's easier to sustain tacit collusion with a small number of firms in the industry than with a large number of firms in the industry. Okay, so from that point of view, the merger makes collusion easier to sustain. Now, there is another potential effect of the merger, which is that it may increase the asymmetry among the remaining firms. Okay, why would that be? Well, if there are scale economies or synergies, well, the merged entity is going to be more efficient than the separate firms were before, and also probably more efficient than the outside firms. Okay, and so it's also likely that this merged entity is going to gain quite a larger market share than the sum of the market shares of the separate firms, making the whole industry more asymmetric in terms of market shares. Okay, now if you think of a multi-product setting, or even if firms have just one product, when they merge, well, the merged firm becomes a multi-product firm, and so by owning a larger set of brands, that may also give an advantage to the merged firm, thereby increasing the asymmetry in the industry. Now, what is the effect of more asymmetry on the sustainability of collusion? Well, in general, if there are more asymmetries, it makes tacit collusion harder to sustain. And there are two reasons for that. It's probably more difficult to define the common collusive price. Okay, so more efficient firms would prefer a lower price than less efficient firms. Okay, so remember, tacit collusion is about the meeting of the minds, right? So firms remain totally independent of one another. They choose non-competitive strategies, but they somehow realize that by setting a higher price than the competitive price, they can make higher profits. Okay, but the question here is, what would be this higher price that firms would set when they choose non-cooperatively their strategies? Well, what we say here is that there is no clear way, no clear price on which the minds of the different firms could meet if these firms are quite different from one another. Okay, and the same argument goes about allocating production quotas between firms. So that would be more the case of an explicit cartel, where firms would decide how much each of them produces. But there also it's harder to make this allocation of production quotas the more firms are asymmetric. Okay, so in summary, this is the lesson here. A merger may exert two conflicting effects on the sustainability of collusion: a positive effect through the reduction in the number of firms, and a negative effect if it increases the asymmetry among firms. Okay, but in any case, competition authority need to take this into account when they analyze whether a merger should be allowed or not. They need to take into account the fact that the merger may lead to these coordinated effects, may make collusion easier to sustain. And so let us just give an illustration of that, referring to a merger case that happened some years ago. Well, before the merger, so we're talking about the industry for bottled water, okay? And the market in the European Union was actually divided among three main firms and a bunch of smaller firms. So Perrier at 36% of the market, then BSN at 23% of the market, Nestlé 17%, and the other firms were together having 24% of the market. Okay, and Nestlé and Perrier, were proposing to merge, and so they came in front of the European Commission saying, well, we would like to merge. I don't know the specifics of the case, but I understand here that there was not a strong efficiency defense, so they were not arguing that they would reduce their costs in a meaningful way. But anyway, just looking at the market shares, it was pretty clear that the proposition couldn't be accepted by the European Commission, because the new entity would have had more than half of the market, leaving just 1/4, or a bit less than 1/4, to the next bigger competitor, and 1/4 of the market to the other firms. Okay, so that would clearly result in a very concentrated market, with the merged firm having a dominant position, and this is something that the Commission would not accept. Now, in that case, it doesn't mean that the merger is completely rejected. I mean, what happens in the real life is that often the competition authority, like the European Commission, proposes what is called a remedy. It says, well, you cannot merge as such, but if you were devolving some of your activities, so if you were selling, for example, a brand like Volvic to your next competitor, that would reduce your dominant position, make the market more balanced, and that may be a situation that we could accept. Okay, so this is what would happen if Volvic is sold by the Nestlé-Perrier merger to BSN. Well, that would balance the market shares, with the merged firm having 38% of the market and having BSN another 38%, and still the other firms would share 1/4 of the market. Now, this looks more balanced, but this is the problem precisely. With a more balanced market, there is less asymmetries between the two main competitors, and that would facilitate potentially the coordination among these firms, so tacit collusion. Okay, so this second solution was actually refused as well by the competition authority, the European Commission, because here of the fear that there would be more collusion after the merger than before. So finally, the deal was to further force Nestlé and Perrier to sell other brands to competitors, and the last scenario was finally cleared by the European Commission. Okay, if you can do some research if you want to have the details, but this case was just used to illustrate that not only the competition authority sometimes proposes remedies, so some kind of compromise, but this compromise may also be refused based on the prospect of coordinated effects. This is all I wanted to stress for this presentation, and I thank you for your attention.